Okay, perfect. We are about to start. I'm gonna give maybe 10 more seconds for everyone that may be a bit late. But anyways, it's great that you were able to make it. Thanks so much. And well, welcome to what I hope is a very informative and interesting conversation uh, in which we're going to discuss about survey research and social inquiry. It's supposed to be a conversation, something very relaxed. You have questions, please put them in the, in the log there. And at the end of the conversation, I will be very happy to answer them as much as I can. So I want to give you, first of all, a bit of a, let's say, preview of what I try to achieve this afternoon. So the conversation is really aimed for everyone. So everyone that has even a remote interest in survey research is welcome. You don't need any statistical background. As long as you have some interest, curiosity on the topic, I think you will get some value out of it. And the way I'm seeing survey research here is as a tool to study societies and social phenomena. So what I'm going to do is try to explain very, very basic concepts that are relevant to understand the work we do as in survey research, and also some potential pitfalls around it. In this process and the way that I organize things, I will try to give a even if superficial, but at least talk about the evolution and trends that we are observing in survey research. So, without further ado, let's start. And let's start right where we should, which is with the people. 8 billion and counting in this planet, put together in societies, in nations, in countries. So, social inquiry is nothing else but an attempt to understand these societies, in particular, their shared values and beliefs. The key word here is shared, because social inquiry starts from two premises. The first one is that society is more than the sum of individual parts. The second premise of social inquiry is that these values and beliefs of society are external to the individual. In other words, societies have a life of their own. The question, of course, is what are those shared social values and beliefs? And we want to understand them not only out of curiosity, but because we believe that this is valuable information that could potentially solve very important social problems. Therefore, from a certain perspective, from a certain angle, social inquiry, in a sense, is the history of our efforts to find what people believe, what people have in their minds. Social scientists have for long trying to figure out how can we get into that very remote, very private space of the human mind and soul. Uh, we've been trying for long to create tools to allow us to get a clear signal out of society and to break through the noise and to find the truth of what people are really thinking, wanting, and observing. So survey research is one of these tools. So let's start by defining it. Professor Rither from the University of Nevada, she defines a survey as a system for collecting information. I really like this definition, first of all, because it's very succinct, and second, because it she's correctly suggesting that a survey is much more than a questionnaire. So many times we talk about a survey as a synonym of a questionnaire, as just a number of questions put together. And that is incorrect because surveys have other aspects related to the administration, which are critical. In fact, a survey can be perceived as a process. According to Professor Reither, she defines 6 steps in the survey process. The very first one, of course, is pretty straightforward, is, well, to define the goals of the study. Second, she suggests that a good survey is informed by the literature and informed by the experts, the opinion of the experts. Third, ideally, you should conduct a preliminary research to determine the type of survey that you need, or even if you need a survey at all. You might find that it's not the best tool to get the signal out of society that you are looking for. Now, here comes the big one, selecting a sample of participants. That is truly the crux of the matter. Who am I going to invite to take part of this survey research? That is of fundamental importance. I'm going to spend some minutes talking about that. A fifth step is to monitor responses and maybe try to make adjustments if needed. And sixth and last, to report on your findings. That would be how a survey process looks like, which, as you see, is quite different of just a simple questionnaire. So let's zoom in that word that I put in bold and in italics. That word, keyword, a sample. So in essence, this is a question of who is going to take part on my survey. Who do I invite? There are two simple criteria that I want to follow here. First, I want to achieve representativeness. Second, I want to avoid bias. Sounds very simple. Well, it's easier said than done. And I'm going to explain why. Let's start talking about the representativeness, which really only becomes a problem uh, when we have we're working in big populations. When we're working in a smaller setting, it's not really a problem. Like, for example, if I have a small group, a classroom with 4 or 5 students, I don't need to worry about a sample really, because I can talk to every single of my students, ask their opinions, know what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're observing, what is their opinion on X, Y, or Z. No problem. But it's when I go into the open societies that I get in trouble. I get in trouble because to achieve representativeness among these sea of individuals, well, it's not as simple, right? It's much more difficult. But these are the interesting groups that I want to explain. The countries, the nations, the communities. So in that case, I do need a sample, a few individuals I will pick from this a sea of individuals that will allow me to generalize about this population, right? Based on my sample, I'm going to be able to, if it's representative, I'm going to be able to generalize with a certain level of certainty. So how do I do this? How can I sample from a large group like this? Remember, when I sample, I want to achieve representativeness. Well, in fact, there's a method. Uh, it's a method, but also I would say it's much more of an ideal, really. Uh, let's call it a golden standard. This golden standard is also called probabilistic sampling or random sampling, or in more simple terms, it's a lottery system, really. Now, this lottery system is not any lottery. It has certain specificities, certain particularities that I want to talk about. Well, to begin with, every single individual in a community should be included, right? This is going to be called my sample frame. The list of every single individual of a community, that's my sample frame. Now, second, everyone has only one and only one ticket. And I want to do this to make sure that everyone has the same chances, the same probability of winning the lottery. In the story by Shirley Jackson called The Lottery, all the villagers in a community, they put their names in that black box that you see there. They grab a piece of paper and they go and they put their names there. And then they all gather in a public square. And then one of the elders of the town starts to pick up names. One. Well, that would be really a great way to get a truly random sample of that population. But again, it's easier said than done. When you think about the practicalities of doing that, it can get very expensive very fast. Because, first of all, I will need to bring a lot of people into a space at the same time on the same day. And also, I will need to know every single individual of a community, have their names. And that is very difficult to achieve. So it's going to be very expensive to get to this golden standard, to do a lottery. And also, maybe also outright impossible to do, because there may be transient people. There may be people that live in that community that I don't even know they exist there. So researchers, because we cannot do this easily, because it's expensive or sometimes impossible to do, researchers try to be inventive. They use their imagination, they use their ideas on how can we, if not achieve the golden standard, at least try to get as close as possible, right? Maybe you cannot get there, but at least you can try in inventive ways to get close to that ideal. So it started in 1960s. Researchers do exactly that. Social researchers try to, and they resort to the use of phone books. Phone books, they help them to get close to the lottery ideal by solving two problems. First of all, it provided a list, or in more technical terms, a sample frame. And this sample frame had the name, the phone, the address of a lot of villagers in a city. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Second of all, the phone book solved the problem of having to get them everyone at the same time to conduct the lottery. Now, you simply grab the phone, you give them a ring, or you can go to their house, knock, knock. You have 5 minutes to spare. I would like to ask you some questions. So the phone book solved these two problems, not entirely, because of course not everyone has a landline, not everyone is included in the sample frame, but certainly it gave a very powerful tool to try to get very close to the lottery ideal. And this, my friends, was a game changer in the history of survey research. And in fact, it started what we call the era of expansion. The era of expansion of survey research that goes between 1960 and 1990. These social and technological advances, technological, the phone, but also social, because at some point the phone was not anymore a luxury item of a few rich people. It started to be found in many, many households, both rich, poor, and middle class, etc. And it gave way to, or it created, or it allowed the possibility of a methodology that we use to these days, which is called random digit dialing, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a method for selecting participants for survey research by selecting telephone numbers at random from a phone book. So based on this technology, based on these social changes, survey research really expanded in this era. It grew throughout universities. This is the time when we start really to see survey research centers explode through the universities across the world. It's a time when also governments start to use survey research to inform their policies, to inform their decisions, and it becomes just a mainstream tool to, in many instances, in government, in academia, in social research, etc. This is really the time when, as I said, survey research really explodes in many different directions. And anyways, those were the good old days. Everything comes to an end, and then the era of expansion came to a close with the arrival of you're gonna guess it for sure, mobile phones, right? You guess it. So mobile phones, they changed the whole thing dramatically for a few reasons that I want to mention. First, well, people started to talk less. They spend less time talking over the phone and more time just simply texting. We see a change of habits here. Uh, Also, the capacity to be able to screen the calls. Okay, I don't recognize this phone number. I'm not gonna pick the phone. And well, of course, they are called mobile for a reason, right? The capacity to phone a mobile phone, you don't really know where the people is. That person may be living in Toronto, but his phone is associated in Calgary. It's not anymore the case that I phone one number and I know that it's going to be ringing in the living room of my grandma. That things changed dramatically. The advent of mobile phones. Uh, we see this in the telephone response rates that significantly dropped starting in the late 90s. And it was just a dramatic change in the industry. Okay, so at this point, I want to make a pause and go back to one of the previous slides because so far we have only really talked about representativeness, and this is only one aspect related to selecting a sample of participants. You will remember we discussed representativeness, but then we need to talk about the second one. And the fact is that it's perfectly possible to achieve one and not the other one, and therefore ending up making mistakes. In fact, many pollsters who are very confident about the level of representativeness of their sample, on many occasions, those same pollsters, they get it wrong, and they get it wrong all the time. It happens so often that pollsters are confident on their samples, and they might be right. Their samples might be representative, but they are blindsided in their forecast by unexpected biases. There's a lot of biases out there. In fact, if you Google them, you can find a catalog of biases. It's a very good read. But we don't have all the time, so I'm gonna focus on two, let's say, branches of biases that I found very relevant. The first one would be no response. So you have a beautiful representative sample, but when you go and put a survey in front of these people, they don't want to answer you. So the quality of the data that you're collecting, despite the fact that the sample was representative, is going to be a poor quality data because you're only capturing the voices of individuals that were willing to express their opinion. The sample is representative, but the data quality is not good. The other problem, the other bias that we can also incur, run into, is that people actually talk to you, but they misrepresent themselves. They're not telling you the truth. They're not telling you really what they have in their minds. In fact, they may even be trying to guess what you really want to hear, or they consider their opinions maybe a bit too radical, and maybe too out of touch to make them public. So instead of being afraid of being frowned upon, they decide instead to misrepresent themselves or to conform to a certain social expectations. That is what we call social desirability bias, and happens all the time. We also run into problems with extreme response bias, when people, they try to go fast through a questionnaire and they go into the highest level of, for example, a strong dislike. Pa, 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 pa. Everything is it seems so strong. But that's because the individual has not taken the time to really reflect and see what is he or she really feel about a movie or a politician. She or he knows that she doesn't like this guy, but it's not as strong the feeling. Maybe just a mild dislike, right? But she's just going through very fast. So that's a bias that we get all the time. What is important to understand here is that there's no way to get rid of these biases. You can't. The only thing you can do is to mitigate them. And you mitigate them through good research design, optimization of your survey research questions, and adjusting, monitoring the answers you're getting, and see what can improve the rate of response, for example. So at this point, we have covered some basic elements of survey research, very basic elements, but certainly the ones that can be expanded. Now what I would like to do in the next minutes is to talk a bit about some current trends that we're observing and what we're looking into the future. What can we expect in survey research? I have a few ideas, a few conjectures that I would like to share with you. And again, feel free to post your questions when you have them. So the first thing is that it is very likely that survey research will be increasingly moving to the internet as the percentage of web users around the world increases. Take a look at this data. We see a very strong increase in the last years, and this is data from 2020, both in the developed and the developing countries, a huge increase on people that are using internet. And they're using it, not they're basically moving into what I describe a virtual world where they conduct really basic activities online, basic human activities, for example, dating, playing, working, praying, exercising, shopping, all kind of things that are basic human activities. We are doing it, like it or not, in a virtual setting. This means for social scientists and pollsters that we need to find individuals, not in the phone anymore, but in the internet. We need to go there, find them, engage with them there where they are. In a way, engage with what I call their virtual persona, their virtual form. The citizens have become they have their own virtual individual, in their virtual personality. And we are able, through different mechanisms, and we should do that, to intercept and capture the voices of these individuals. But here is the problem. Different than when the phone started, the era of expansion, when the phone, etc. Back in those days, you have a phone book. We don't have a phone book of web users. It just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist a phone book or a ebook with the name, the email, the address of these individuals that you see there. It just doesn't exist. So one way to get out of this problem is to create made up phone books. And this is exactly what panel research companies try to achieve to get closer to the lottery ideal, the golden standard, and to achieve a certain level of representativeness. So panels essentially are formed by web users that are either recruited or they decide to join themselves, and that they have certain characteristics that make them representative of the larger group at large. For example, if you want to put together a panel that is representative in a country, you probably will want to have a 50-50 male-female ratio. If you want to make it representative of age, you may want to have, for example, 40% of panelists between 18 and 29 years old, and 20% of them 50 years more, 50 years plus. And once you have enough participants, once you have created your phone book, then you can run the lottery system, and then you can mimic to a certain extent the principles of random sampling, the principles of lottery system. Personally, I like to compare the panel and panel building as with a couple of metaphors. One would be, for example, a puzzle. If you want, for example, to create a panel for the city of Paris, potentially you could recruit 1,000 panelists from every group, age, quarter of the city. Every single group, migrants, non-migrants, workers, unemployed, old, young, female, and put them together, put all these 1,000 pieces together and make a Paris at scale. Make a Paris at scale that will allow you to run a lottery and get answers from the panelists. It won't be Paris. It's not Paris. It's a miniature Paris. It's a tiny Paris that you have, with a lot of craft, with a lot of patience, have put together by bringing carefully piece by piece to make it look like if it was a real thing. Another metaphor for panel would be, for example, a landscaper. A landscaper is observing the real world, and with his art, he's able to capture the light, the movement, the shape of everything that he's observing, everything that he's feeling. He's trying to put it carefully in his canvas. The painting is not the landscape itself, right? But if he's giving us a very good idea of it, and if the artist is of quality, it may even transport us there. Now, from what I just said, it is quite evident that it's not easy to put together a panel to achieve a high level of representativeness. On the contrary, it's quite an art. And in this case, the problem that we run is that we may run into sample bias, which results from the possibility that panelists are different from the general population. I want to give you some examples so it's clear. Some researchers they have done a lot of work on testing the quality of panel research. They have argued that panelists tend to be panel members, panelists tend to have individuals that are more extroverted or chatty. People that really like to express their voice, those are the guys that are willing to accept an invitation to join a panel, or out of their own accord, they will sign up to take part of a panel study. Why? Because they like their voice to be heard, right? So therefore, the risk is that in a panel, we're only capturing the voices of the most politicized and opinionated individuals in a society. Again, this is just a possibility, right? These are debates that are happening right now in social science. Ironically, there's the other position. There are some researchers that argue that in fact, panelists might be in fact the quiet voices of society. They say that panelists tend to be individuals that like to participate in politics, but from the comfort of their home, right? And behind a computer. They say that panelists are not really the type of individual that will take part in a riot or in a violent clash with police, or that even will join a rally. Again, this is just a possibility, but it's plausible. It's plausible. We have to find evidence about this, but it is plausible. One more risk that I want to talk about when we think about panel and sample bias is that even assuming that both your panelists and the non-panelist population, they are exactly the same. Imagine for a second that you have really nailed it, that your panel is as representative as they can be. Well, the possibility exists also that by sending them questions constantly, the individuals in the panel are getting more and more knowledgeable, more wiser, so speaking. By just being asked constantly questions, they might end up, in a matter of 1 year or 2 years, more politicized, more knowledgeable than the general population, which then calls into question the validity of the data that we are collecting from these very knowledgeable, very politicized individuals that, by virtue of being answering questions all the time, are very much in the know. Um, Again, and I'm getting close to the question part. This is not to say that the panel research is not valuable. Absolutely not. On the contrary, lots and lots of great social research and findings have done with this method, which has a lot of merit. But we really need to be mindful when we talk about panels and panel research. We really need to know who is included and who has been excluded in the panel, because that will give us a sense of the level of bias and, of course, the quality of the data that we are getting. Because we don't want to be like the poster that I showed you, sign blinded by a bias that you didn't expect. One more thing also, and I already mentioned this, you cannot get rid of the biases. The biases are there to be reckoned with, to be mitigated, to be to use our intelligence and imagination to be how can we do social research in a place with human beings that are naturally have a natural inclination, for example, to social desirability bias. We have that, everyone has that natural inclination. We want to conform in most occasions because we, as I said, we live in society and there are external values that matter to me as an individual. Also, the fact that we don't have a sample frame in for web users, that doesn't really mean that we need to forget about online survey research. On the contrary, no, that is the future. Everyone, and it's going to happen more and more, are going to increasingly conduct very, very basic human activities. As I said, working, shopping, dating, playing, praying, very basic human activities online. So we need to, the issue with biases and the issue with the lack of a sample frame is really an invitation to think on creative and innovative ways of mitigating those problems. And you also try to engage with all individuals that make up society. That is in fact what we try to do every day at Rewi, by the way. We try to innovate and go beyond panels to reach every voice because we believe that every voice matters. Well, I think we have come full circle. The challenge of social inquiry and social science in general is and will remain to be on how to break the noise and to find the truth about what people, those individuals that you see, what are they really thinking? What do they really want? What are they observing? So survey research is a tool that allows us to do this. And as we have seen, and I hope I was able to convey that message, that is driven by social and technological factors and changes in society. Uh, okay, I think I'm gonna stop here, and thank you for your attention. And if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Uh, I don't see them. I saw one question, but I open chat. I'm here. I'm getting the instructions from Rig. We are here, but apologies. Review. I'm just trying to. Okay, so I have one question here. Okay, yeah, I see them. Um, Question one: with all the technological changes that we see, is there any future for telephone surveys using landlines? Okay, so the question is related to random digit dialing, right? Mm. It's a good question, and thank you very much for writing it down. Uh, I see some future. I see some future for it. Uh, because of the declining rate, it's going to be very difficult to get any more or get close to the lottery ideal. The fact is that the phone books, if they exist today, they would be very much more thin. When I was a little kid, they were huge. Probably now, not a lot of people have landlines anymore at home. So we won't be able to use them to make a representative sample. Having said that, more and more we also see what we call as alternative data or very niche data. So for example, I can see some use for random digit dialing today and in the next years to really get the voices of a particular demographic. So the question is, who is using landlines today? Are people over, let's say, over 45 or over 50, or uh, people that maybe they don't like to have a mobile, people that they don't like to carry a mobile phone. Uh, there should be certain characteristics uh, that are shared among those individuals that have a landline these days, and that may be still in a phone book. So I can see a great value for telephone service to be able to get those specific voices that, as I say, I don't know, but I'm guessing that they must share certain characteristics. Okay, I hope that makes sense. There's another question here. Uh, what is more difficult when selecting a sample of participants? To achieve representativeness or to avoid biases? So what is more difficult when selecting a sample? Well, I'm gonna say I'm gonna say that it's more difficult to avoid biases. Yeah, in fact, as I said during our conversation, you you really can't avoid them. You kind of more try to mitigate them. You have to be a very good survey research designer to really avoid them. Uh, but most of the times you can only mitigate them. With representativeness, at the very least, it's very difficult to achieve. But at the very least, we we know if we achieved it or not, right? At the end of the day, we can manage to see, okay, I got these individuals, or maybe my sample is lacking in young voices, or my sample is lacking, it has is skewed to male or skewed to young. So there's ways of knowing if I have achieved a level of representativeness. But biases are more tricky uh, because you don't really know is there. for example, if I ask you a question, how do I know if you are really telling me the truth? How do I know that? It's not immediate, right? I might take your word, as I might take your word, but I don't really know for sure if you're telling me the truth. So I'm gonna say that it's more difficult to mitigate biases than to achieve a confidence, a high level of representativeness. I see one more question that just came up right now. So why do pollsters in elections seems to be always wrong? Uh, that's a good question. The fact is, well, one problem that we have seen lately is that they are missing certain individuals that are not willing to express their opinion. We mentioned it before, the non-response bias, right? That is one issue. So the voices they're collecting are only of those that are willing to express their opinion. And again, these voices tend to be the most politicized, the most opinionated individuals in a society, which it may not be the case, right? Not everyone cares about politics, that's the fact. That is one possibility. And it may be a bit connected to what we discussed about panelists. Are panelists really representative? Are they the same of the general population? Or my panel has certain characteristics that make them maybe, let's say, more on the left or more on the right? That's one. Another problem that we have seen with posters is that one thing is to know what people like, and another one is to predict if they're actually going to act on it. So some people or some posters go and collect, do you like this part in particular, yes, or the other one? So they come with these numbers, but that doesn't mean that people are going to bother that day on election day to drive, spend 2 hours in a line to mark a ballot and vote, right? So one thing is what we like, and another one is what actually we're willing to do for that. And it has been in some instances we have seen that uh, some individuals that express their opinion in a poll were not really ready, or they didn't want to, they didn't bother on election day to go and express their vote, maybe out of confidence, or maybe they didn't have time, etc. Okay, if okay, there's one here. Uh, that's another one. Will AI, artificial intelligence, have an impact on surveys online? Well, I mean, my first reaction would be yes. I mean, artificial intelligence will have an impact in every aspect of our lives. I just was reading an article by, I forgot, the guy from Microsoft. Anyways, you know him. He was saying that artificial intelligence is going to be like really one of those things that change the the Gates, by the way, Bill Gates, the course of humanity, right? And this is coming from a man that really has seen a lot of changes and was part of a huge change uh, 20, 30 years ago. So it's going to impact uh, how? I guess that's a real question. Uh, I can see, but probably this is a topic of a different webinar, many ways in which artificial intelligence can really disrupt the way we conduct surveys. One that it comes to my mind, for example, is that we're starting to see that we collect data uh, not precisely by asking questions, but just simply by following individuals in their day-to-day lives, right? So it may be the case that we don't need to ask questions, but rather just to observe their behavior, both in the real life and the virtual world, to be able to really know what's in their mind, right? As I said before, at the beginning of the conversation, we really want to know what is in the mind of individuals because we think that can help us solve certain social problems and forecast solutions or problems that might come and affect us all. Okay, well, I don't see any more Danny McIntyre, which is in the controls at Riwi. I don't think she's sending me any more questions. So I think this is it. Unless there's one more. Well, I don't think so, Danny. No. Well, you didn't see her, but Danny McIntyre is behind this, and she was really, really helpful. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, everyone that took the time today to join us to have that very, accessible conversation. I hope let's carry on this conversation. Email me, uh, send me notes, send me your questions if you have them, and we'll be happy to carry on and keep learning about the fascinating world of survey research and social science. Okay, well, have a good afternoon. Ciao, ciao.